World of RPGs, episode 15, Germany, part 2 of 3. Welcome to the World of RPGs, a podcast in which we travel around the globe and learn about the local role-playing game scenes. I'm your host, Mo Bartz, and in episode 15 we are going to Germany. Or rather, staying in Germany, because this is part 2. It might be a bit confusing if you haven't listened to the first part, especially if you have never heard of the Dark Eye. But to summarize the role-playing scene in Germany from the last episode, RPGs came early to the German market, but due to some business shenanigans, D&D was never that popular in the first 20 years. With two homegrown fantasy RPGs, Midgard and Das Schwarze Auge, taking center stage. Other American and British RPGs were translated into German, and especially Shadowrun, Call of Cthulhu, and Vampire the Masquerade became quite popular. These are also the games that I mostly grew up with in the 1990s, so this part is full of nostalgia for me. I got into TTRPGs in 1994, weirdly enough with Palladium's Heroes Unlimited, which I found in a gaming store while on vacation in the USA. I didn't quite figure out how GMing worked based on that book alone, so friends showed me the ropes with Das Schwarze Auge. I quickly moved away from that, though, and mostly ran German translations of Shadowrun and Earthdawn in my teens until I discovered Call of Cthulhu and the World of Darkness. Because of some overlaps with these translated games, we'll also use this episode to talk about inclusion and sustainability in role-playing games. Look, I try to keep politics out of the podcast, though of course you could argue that my choice of places I cover or not cover is somewhat political. Whatever. But if there's one political agenda I have in this podcast, it is that games should be for everyone. And if you don't like to be inclusive, just stay with people who are just like you. I'm not forcing you to change. It's just that I don't like barriers to gaming. Our hobby is small enough as it is, so let's open up. This is also why we begin with Dungeons & Dragons, even though I don't really play it myself.
My name is Chris. I'm 34 years old and I love fantasy since I am, 3, since I got my first Lego. I don't know. I had a really big castle of knights, Lego, and that was my first time to create adventures on my own. And I'm really addicted in fantasy games, PC games, in German games like Gothic, or the Gothic series. I don't know if it's really popular outside from Germany, I don't know. Board games, really cool. Role-play games, very, very late. My first game was with 25. And now I'm a dungeon master of D&D for 8 years. Maybe 2 years after my first game, we played AD&D. For the first time, a friend of mine had the old books of his father back to the 80s. And our dungeon master was really, really cool. He was really involved. We had not the full deck of rules. We had just 4 attributes, not 6, and we had no classes. I played a half demon and I was very, very excited. So that was my first contact with role-playing games. And yeah, now I'm here.
And you're still playing Dungeons & Dragons, if I understand that right?
Yeah, most of the time. I had played some other systems, sometimes Call of Cthulhu, Dungeon Slayers, a small German system. I don't know if people outside from Germany knows this system.
Yeah, can you maybe say something about Dungeon Slayers? Because I've never played it.
I hated it. It's also a D20 system, and you have to add lots of confusing bonuses to your stats. You have lots of talents you can pick and level up with attribute points. And I designed the 2 systems on my own. I tried it at my very, very, very first years. A big one, it's a mix of the Dark Eye and Dungeons and Dragons, I guess. I had talent trees like video games, and yeah, you could pick lots of talents, and with level up you could get better and so on. And a really small one with some D6 dice in a pool system, similar Shadowrun, but less of rules.
but you also published material for D&D 5th edition, or D&D 5th edition compatible material, rather.
I have a website and an online shop, and mostly I write adventures, one-shots or few shots for D&D.
And are these only in German or also available in English?
Some adventures are available in English. One of my first ones in German, O du Schreckliche, or We Wish You a Scary Christmas on the Skirt, or The Secrets of the Whisperwood is a longer one, 60-pager. You can play maybe 3 to 5 sessions, but most adventures are in German.
And would you say there's anything typical German in these adventures compared to the English stuff?
I'm not very sure. In the We Wish You a Scary Christmas adventure, I have a mythical creature. In Germany, we have lots of mythical creatures. They're called Krampus, of Legendaries or Law of Bavaria. Yeah, in this adventure, a half-devil has kidnapped and replaced Santa Claus and is terrifying everyone, and his companions are these Krampus creatures. They have lots of chains on their body, they have long claws, and then they come with a cheap rug, and then they will catch you and bring you to fake Santa Claus.
Okay, making Christmas scary sounds very German to me.
Maybe, yeah.
How do you see the D&D scene in Germany compared to other games there? Because when I got into role-playing games, it was really small because there were few translations, and now it seems to be bigger, and I didn't really catch up on that.
Yeah, most publications of Wizards of the Coast from Dungeons and Dragons are coming in German, mostly 6 months or maybe 1 year later. So we have all the official stuff of D&D in Germany. We are a big country. We have a big community. We have some German stuff of Kobold Press in German, the monster books and sub-adventures.
When I was more active in the role-playing scene in Germany, this was in the late 1990s, early 2000s, almost nobody was playing D&D in Germany.
No. It's really popular now. The most played game in Germany as a role-playing game is D&D. Actually, we have lots of TikTokers, Instagrammers, all small creators. On YouTube, we have nice shows. Similar to Critical Role, just smaller. We have this YouTube channel called Dice Actors, and they are all professional voice actors. And they had a long campaign. It's one of the biggest channel in Germany. I guess they have 13 or 14,000 subscriptions. For Germany, it's big, yeah. Yeah, we have lots of small streamers on Twitch for live shows, and some of them are really, really good. Things like Baldur's Gate 3 or the last D&D movie were very helpful to get more interest in the hobby. Yeah.
And you also did something with pedagogy in gaming. Can you maybe say something about that?
Yes, I studied to be a pedagogue. 10 years ago, I already saw the great benefits for social skills that are acquired through role-playing games. I'm really, really excited about more and more pedagogics using role-playing methods to teach, to educate, or in other cases. Children and teenagers benefit immensely from playing these games at home. Creativity, solution-oriented behavior, teamwork, and so on. Roleplay offers a protected environment where you can try things out and learn natively these soft skills. I love it. I love it in this case. And until 2023, I had also a podcast format in German where I regularly had guests from the community who use role-playing games or D&D in a professional context. This ranged from kindergarten with storytelling games about symbols on dice, or to create stories together, or to elementary school with some systems like Little Wizards for the children, or in secondary school playing was offered. I have afternoon care for the teenagers. And a friend of mine told me that some of the teenagers got their first books to read, the core books, to understand the rules to be a dungeon master. Yeah. And it was a really good thing for him. And I have friends who offer themed weeks for schools where pupils slip into the roles of journalists, for example, and acquire media skills through role play. In research adventure, for example, they learn what fake news is and stuff like this. And many of these things are becoming increasingly important, especially because AI is taking up more and more space in private life, school, and work. And I think creativity is a very big thing for the future. Now to my own work. Sorry for the long introduction. I wrote an educational adventure for a project called Mission Sustainable at the Biosphere in Potsdam. Potsdam is a city near Berlin, our capital. It was about the world of the Amazon and how to learn more about complex interrelationships of raw material extraction in the rainforest. It was a really, really cool project. In other words, an environmental project. I loved it, and I loved the students of this project. Yeah.
Was it in German or also published in English? And is it available?
Just German, all in German. The Germans are very lazy. They loved their own language.
Was it an adventure with rules also, or was it more like a scenario?
Adventure with rules. We use the How to Be a Hero system. It's also a German system. You have just one D100 and all checks are made with percents, and you have lots of points you can give in social skills and body strengths and your intellectual properties. And then you can also use another pool of points for specific skills. Maybe you are very strong in sword fighting, for example. And so you can create your very, very own character. The young people are supposed to learn more about the deforesting of the rainforest and more about the actors involved, the topic. And they slip into the role of an environmental activist in the Amazon who goes on dangerous mission together in a team like normal role-playing games. They will deal with the challenges and consequences of resources extraction and environmental pollution. I had ready-made characters for various environmental activists, all very young, all playable as male, female, or diverse versions. They had some basic motivations, some flaws, and some skills important for the adventure.
And was this like a one-off event, or is this like a module that can be reused, or like is it published in any way?
It should be published. It's all about a 2-day workshop. At first, the pupils got some introduction in theater skills. And the second day, they played the game. And after that, we had some reflecting sessions to talk about the experiences in the adventure. And you can play it in every school if you want, or pedagogy places if you have the manpower to get it.
And so when you actually did the workshop, you said an introduction to theatric play. Did you do that, or did you have a team?
No. That was not my part. My part was writing the adventure and dungeon mastering the adventure for one of the groups. The reflecting session after that with a colleague of mine. For the workshop of that theater sessions, we had a specialist. And now for someone from my hometown, there was a convention last year that focused on sustainability and diversity. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend myself because I live in a different country, but I managed to talk to one of the organizers.
I'm Ingmar from Germany, living in Hanover, working for the municipality of Hanover, and I'm playing role-playing games for I think about now 35 years. More or less constantly. At the moment, I'm game mastering Call of Cthulhu: Mask of Nyarlathotep. So we're playing now for 1.5 years, playing once in a month. course, everyone's working, so it's a bit hard to get a regular session. But things only few months left till we finish it and could start something new. And started playing with Midgard. I think it's the oldest German RPG, and that's ages ago, like 35 years. And sometimes I play online with friends who had started playing 35 years ago, who are now just around the whole of Germany, still trying to get playing RPGs regularly, but got a bit harder.
I contacted you because of a gaming event in Hanover. Can you maybe say a little bit about that one?
We did a convention, Hannover lernt spielend, like Hanover learns playing or learns by play. My fellow worker is big in board gaming and I'm bigger in the RPG, so we asked if we could involve it with our work, and we started with some mystery game set in context of a fair trade as we work for sustainability office. And then we met other people and talked about how we could use games, especially board games and RPGs, for political education. So just 5 years later, we started to make this convention where we brought people together who were involved with how are games used for political education, as well as how are political discussions reflected in games and RPGs. So we had some people talking about queer RPGs, as well as we had Board Game Historian, which is a blog who is about historical events in board games and the like. And we started for the first time and tried to bring people together from those who are playing games, RPGs or board games, and who are interested in having discussion how society is reflected in games, as well as people who are doing more or less scientific research on games. There was one funny thing, there was one person who was doing a PhD on atomic energy in the 1980s and how it's the political discussion back there. And he will have a chapter in his PhD about how is atomic energy reflected within board games. So we had some really weird and some really nice lectures, as well as we had some really nice gaming sessions. We tried to have some so people could get more practical into the issue.
So originally the meeting was scheduled for 2020, I think, wasn't it? And then the pandemic happened.
Yes, we would started just, I think, 1 or 2 months, and then the pandemic was, so we have to discard it, and we'll done it then, I think, 1 or 2 years later. And we're going to plan to do another convention next year in November. So hopefully if we get the fundings, then we'll do another convention about political issues in board games and RPGs. And we're planning to have some thematic, mostly around colonialism and racism. And we had the last one was mainly around gender issues and queer politics. But always we have a strong part of sustainability, ecological themes, as this is where we come from. We do this a bit from work. So it's kind of work we're doing, which is really nice to do such things at work.
I'll say a criticism here, which I usually don't do, but when you change the topic from the 2020 scheduled one to the one which happened, you change the focus also to sustainability. And it said, dice shouldn't just be made of plastic. And I can understand the sentiment that plastic has a problem, but I have plastic dice I've had since the early 90s, and they still use them. So I thought, yes, you're right, dice made of metal or wood would be more sustainable, but it's not that I throw away my plastic dice that I got 30 years ago.
Yeah, but I think that's especially a role-playing kind of how you deal with your dice, as most of the board gamers didn't care about their dice. I always see when I went down to the RPG shop here in Hanover, people buying dice, they're rolling dice to get the best dice, who throw the best numbers. So I think the love for dice is a bit weird within the RPG scene, more than within the board game scene. So I still have my dice from 35 years ago, so I can understand that. And what's more sustainable than using the stuff you got ages ago?
Coming back to the event itself, so the people who attended, were those role players interested in societal topics, or were they people into societal topics who wanted to look into games?
I think there were mostly people who play role-playing games who are interested in political topics. Most of the people attended either were authors themselves who are writing for or working for small companies who are editing RPGs. There were some people who use live action role play within the work with the youth work. So like working with teenagers and going out at the woods for something. They call themselves Waldritter, some kind of wood knights. They're really big in Germany who use LARP for working with teens and kids for social and political topics. And they're using drama games as well. So we tried to show people how you could use games, RPGs as well as board games within political work or social work. It was the first convention we did and we learned a lot. So I think next time, hopefully next year in November, could reach a broader audience and hopefully some people who are interested in how to use games, RPGs, board games, whatever, LARP in their work.
Just to get that right, that was organized by the municipality of the city.
There were lots of people involved. We are the sustainability office of the city of Hanover, the equal opportunity office were as well there, of course we had the gender issues, and there were some people from the Bildungsverein, which is a community college we could use. One of their houses, we had all the stuff for educational works there and lots of technical stuff, which was really good. So, and there were another who's doing political education for trade union, Arbeit und Leben, work and life. They're from the big German union. They were also involved. So we tried to get involved lots of different people, as well as from the political part, like sustainability and gender, as well as from the educational part, especially from the adult education.
Maybe one thing we have to clear here about the German language is that it's difficult to say role-playing game in German because, and this is not unique to German, many languages where there are role players have the same problem, that outside of English, in many languages, play and game are the same word. So in German, it's Spiel. So Rollenspiel can mean role game or role play. So I recently looked up like role players in Hanover and found a group of consultants who train people for role plays, meaning if you want to like do an assessment center or you want to, I don't know, simulate a job interview, they do that. And that's also called role play. So in German and in many other languages, it's kind of difficult to talk about the distinction here. But this convention was, or this event was clearly about the gaming aspect also in education. So just to make that clear.
Yeah, because of that, we now often use either RPG as well, role-playing game, as well as pen and paper to distinguish it, especially from computer games. So a bit like if you're saying you're doing games or you're a gamer, so everyone thinks you're doing computer games. And no, we are tabletop gamers. So as well as there's some sexual connection as well as role-playing, that's sometimes also a problem. So because of that, we're using RPG at the moment more, or pen and paper. Especially pen and paper now is used in Germany as well.
So for my podcast, I say TTRPG for tabletop role-playing game. In Japan, they say TRPG for table role-playing. And in Germany, pen and paper, even though it's an English term, seems to be more common. Speaking of Germany, do you think any of the societal issues you talked about are typical for the German context?
The first thing in mind is everything connected with World War II. So like there's Achtung Cthulhu, which I think is really big or is bigger in the US. So, and if you read critics on that in German, they are always talking about, aren't the Nazis too nice? Or you feel there is some problem with how the war and the Nazi regime are presented in this kind of games. So especially everything connected with World War II is a bit more, not problematic, but we're more sensible about that. So like when your grandfather is involved in killing 6 million Jews, you're a bit, more sensitive about that.
Then also maybe for context, because you talked about sustainability issues, The sustainability movement in Germany is pretty big. It started a long time ago, but it really became big in the 1980s, I guess. And currently, the Green Party is also part of the government. And in Hanover, the mayor is from the Green Party. So it's pretty much a mainstream topic, I would say, in German society to talk about sustainability.
Yeah, it's reflected especially in the board games. So there's lots of discussion on how sustainability is reflected in the games, like emission or zero CO city, or there will be a new energy settler, like Settlers of Catan, with a new edition with about the topics new energy. In role-playing games, it's not so broad, but I think there is the issue of how the game material are printed or where the sources. It's in the board games as well, but not that much, as I think 90% of the board games are produced in China. And so especially the smaller role-playing games are printed either in Germany or Poland as well. So there is some sustainability issues are raised within the production of the materials.
Is there anything you want to add before I stop the recording?
I think the awareness of how political and social issues are reflected in role-playing games are rising constantly. So people talking more about what kind of pictures are used for illustrating in RPGs, or another issue is like in tabletop war games. So like how women presented, those barbarian only wearing male bikini. There are still miniatures or illustration doing that, but in the meanwhile, women are more reasonably armored, I would say. So like the gender issue is more reflected. So like it's not that sexist view anymore like in the 80s. It's getting better. Sustainability is growing as well, especially in Germany. So the social and political discussion raised the awareness for the hobby, how this is represented in the hobby.
One of my main games as a teenager was Shadowrun. I have since moved away from it, but I was not the only one in Germany for whom that game was or is important. And by the way, that little advert I played in German in the last part was about a Shadowrun podcast too.
My name is Michael Krassel, and I started role-playing games in the age of 9 years when I came to the higher school, which is gymnasium here in Germany. And of course, we started with The Dark Eye, I guess it's called in America, which was there in toy stores. And a friend of mine just walked through the toy store and saw something like the Adventure base set or something like this. And he was curious and bought it and said, hey, come on, we got to play this. And then it all began like a stampede. We started with Vampire, Star Wars, Shadowrun, Earthdawn.
And which games are you playing now?
I am GM for life now, and I still play a lot of games. Usually Shadowrun, Earthdawn, Splittermond. I don't know if you guys know this over there. What else? Torque, Numenera, everything.
Okay, so Splittermond is a German game. It roughly translates as Splintered Moon. Can you maybe shortly say something about that one?
It's a huge world with like separate zones, ice zone, desert zone, jungle zone, whatever. And it's roughly an EDO fantasy setting, but with some twists, like gnomes have horns and you can have lizards and whatever. It's basically fantasy with some twists, you can say.
Okay, I've never played it myself, but I've skimmed through it because we wanted to run a campaign. I would have been a player, so I looked at the character options, but it didn't come to pass. Yeah, so I've never played it myself. Okay, and then you've not just played all kinds of games and GM'd them, you are also involved with a small publisher now. Can you maybe say something about them?
The publisher is called Polyfeder, which is artificial word like polyeder, dice, and feather for the scribes. We do the translation, the German version for Subversion, which is from Fragging Unicorn Games. And this is our first project. We just finished crowdfunding and are in work now. We are planning to do other stuff too when the sea is smoother. It's still rough. It's still struggling for existence. But yeah, we get along pretty good.
And this Subversion game, I saw the crowdfunding for the English version, is a bit like an adaptation of Shadowrun, isn't it? The setting.
It's like the same fantasy dystopia cyberpunk setting, but also with some other special features. For example, in Version, the branch to the real reality is in old Babylon. There was a great event. Babylon conquered like the whole crescent moon and Arabia, North Africa. And then the power was disturbed by shattering a great event where the whole crescent was submerged underneath the sea and the whole kingdom is gone. 2,000 years later, there was a new continent called the Azor, where they founded a new city called Neo-Babylon, and history repeats itself. They again started to build arcanocracy, rule of arcanists.
So you already used some game-specific terms. Were there any challenges in the translation? Anything that was difficult to port into German?
Of course. For example, we have a skill called observation. Observation in English is by ears, by eyes, by everything. You can even use it as some kind of a research skill to find things out. And there's no real expression in Germany. We could have like beobachten, watching with your eyes, or Sinnenschärfe, which is everything you can sense. But we don't have the whole spectrum of the word. Yeah? We find this in a lot of small game terms. There are certain defense skills for physical, mental, or magic that are called vigilance, aegis, and these are, even in American English, are aegis, for example, not common words. If you just put it one-to-one into German, the people just don't get the full meaning. Translation is always.
So Shadowrun is quite popular in Germany, so maybe I can ask one or two questions about that. An interesting thing I always found is that there are some German-specific Shadowrun books. Do you know about these?
Yes, I do. They're from Pegasus, which is also the license distributor for Shadowrun in Germany for the American stuff. And I'm also a freelancer for Pegasus, which means I translate some of the books into German. But I'm also an author to write some of the books or parts of the books there. We have a huge Shadowrun community. Shadowrun depends on the years, on rank 2 to 4 in popularity rankings. And part of the success for Shadowrun is that we have German books. We have books to play in the, I don't know the correct translation for this. In Germany, it's ADL, Allianz Deutscher Länder.
Alliance of German countries or German states?
No, it's a little bit different. It's different letters, but let's just go with this, yeah? Which means we have the Shadowrun version of Berlin, an anarchist city in the state flux. We have the Shadowrun version of Hamburg, which is partly flooded. We have the Sox area where a nuclear power plant had a meltdown, a huge area with mutants and outlaws. Yeah, it's fun. And it's because it's Shadowrun, totally different world. Magic, man meets machine. Yeah. I did part of the campaign Vendetta, which takes place in the Rhein-Ruhr megaplex. It's a story about the clash of two mafia clans and their struggle to find a new way in the new world, in the sixth world, and did some smaller parts. We have a format here called Data Pulse, This is small snippets, small giveaways for free. And after a certain time, they get summed up in a Schattendossier.
Means shadow dossier. So it's like a collection of short essays and stories. Okay. And do you know why Shadowrun is so popular in Germany?
I can just take a shot here. It's one of the older systems, and it became popular in a time where we didn't have that much variety. There was only Dark Eye, Vampire, Earthdawn, and Shadowrun, and some smaller parts like Traveler also, but they never got that big here in Germany. It was something totally different to the standard fantasy stuff that was en vogue in that time. And for me, it was the moment when I looked at the cover from version 1, where you saw those guys. I think it was a street SAM that gave cover to a decker that plugged into the terminal here. You see this picture and you wonder what's going on here. What are they doing? Why is there this terminal? How is this world working? This was the specific part. It was a new element there that you didn't have in any other form.
Yeah, this is a very evocative cover. I agree. It was also one of the first games I actually run myself in Germany. It was probably the second edition in the mid-90s. And by the way, the first Germany source book was also translated into English, wasn't it? Deutschland in den Schatten. I think that's available in English. Yeah. And there are also Shadowrun novels written in German. And was Markus Heitz involved back then?
Mm-hmm.
Because he became quite famous as a fantasy author.
The dwarves, the orcs, the elves, yeah.
That's what came later, the Dwarf series. But he did start out also with Shadowrun stories.
What we have here is Periodica, which comes out every month. And Andreas does this, Andreas Schroth. He started this years ago as kind of like in-time handout for his own campaign. And he just published it, fan work. And it grew and grew. And this is a real in-time document. We also have Adventskalender.
Advent calendar. It doesn't exist in English. We might have to explain it. So in German tradition, for Christmas, the 24 days before Christmas Eve, usually children have like a calendar with little doors they open. The traditional one is made of paper with pictures, or there's one with chocolate, and then there's one for older people with beer or with, I don't know, condoms and stuff. These exist.
Everything. Tools.
Yeah, that's very weird. And also many communities use websites to have like special features every day during this time. So that's called an Advent calendar, the 24 days before Christmas.
Yeah. For example, we had an Adventskalender with 24 deaths of popular Shadowrunners in Germany. In ADL, I have to say. We always have April's Fool. This is very vivid in Germany.
Guess how large that community is?
Not really. The German market is different than the American one. If you have 1,000 copies of a core rule book, that is a lot. I know the American numbers are totally different to this, but here it's a lot. Only the big systems like the Dark Eye have more copies. But they also started to do crowdfundings now to lower their risk and stuff. So, yeah. We have this ranking with popularity. It doesn't give any real numbers. It's just a slice of the cake. And I guess Shadowrun was around about 23% or something, which is really huge. After this 23%, it starts to crumble. Then there are like 8%, and the rest is just smaller digits.
And you also have a website called Lord of the Dice. This includes a podcast, if I'm not mistaken. Can you talk a bit about that one?
Yeah, of course. It was in the Corona pandemic when I was listening to a lot of podcasts, and I enjoy to listen to podcasts, roleplay podcasts especially, and there was no German Shadowrun podcast. I was wondering why, and I just decided, okay, never did this before, but I will do podcast now. I will do a Shadowrun podcast, which is a niche in a niche, but okay, fine. I enjoy to do new stuff, take new challenges, and I didn't have a clue. I started with Audacity and a cheap mic, but yeah, got better by the way. I have different features. One of them is the interactive audiobook, where I do like choose your own adventure stuff. I make a scene like 5 to 15 minutes, and I give some options for the listeners to choose. And then I continue with their choice in the next feature. This is something that was a lot of fun to work on, and I enjoyed the communication with my community. First season was set in Berlin. The second season was in Stuttgart, which is a city nearby here where I grew up. It's like 60 kilometers, 45 miles from here. So I know Stuttgart, and I really love this one. And the third season, which is now running, is in Rhein-Ruhrplex. Because, yeah, Lovewire, Sarah Group and stuff.
Yeah, so also for the listeners, the Ruhr area in Germany is where industrialization started, and it's like all the cities are actually kind of like one city because you can just take a bus or tram. And I'm not talking about Shadowrun, I'm talking about now, the situation now. And it's like 10 minutes to the next big city. And there has been some deindustrialization in the area and lots of like industrial ruins. So even right now, it looks like a dystopian setting. And of course, that it's very suited for any kind of dark future or post-apocalyptic setting or Shadowrun.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, and we have like river harbors here and a lot of highways. That all adds up to the busy, buzzing chaos. Yeah, I love it. I started with Ask Me Anything stuff, but this is not on regular base because I don't get too much questions. I have a theory feature where I just go on a little bit sophisticated, a little bit more than the average player needs, like game theory, like morality in Shadowrun, like how to deal with death. I have 200 publications now, so it's a lot of stuff. Then I have the history of the Sixth World in 10-minute snippets. Like the last one was Goblinization. Other features are Dragons in Sixth World and Vitas. So I'm in an early state of history and just keep going. You see, it's Goblinization right now. So we still have to go the Matrix and other stuff. It's in the beginning now. I have a lot of interviews. You have Andrea from Port Planning Games today, you said earlier. She was already in my show. I had Andreas Schroth, which is the new leading developer for the German Shadowrun. I had David Grade, who is an author for, I guess it's 3 Shadowrun novels in German. I had Melanie Helke, who is in Shadowrun and Cthulhu and a lot of other stuff, and also has a publishing house with her husband and Oliver Hossmann. They are the Story Punks. Erdenstern is a German band who does role-playing game music with special themes like Into the Green, it's forest music, Into the White, more snow-based music. It's with less structure but more vivid, and I enjoy this very much. I enjoy to get to know the persons in the moment of the interview. Sometimes I have special features like a talk with some other Shadowrun friends, like Battle of the Versions, where we talked about the development of the versions, the feeling that they give us. I don't know if you are up with it, but the 4th version more or less was clean, was corporate mercenary style, and 1st, 2nd, 3rd edition were much more grittier. And now it's a little bit over the edge. The runners are finished when they have their character creation and they don't develop that much anymore. Yeah, it's different kinds of feelings that the versions give us. And it was a lot of fun because I had some veterans that did the old versions. It's very interesting to look at this.
Now let's switch to another topic, and that's inclusion or diversity in gaming. I got the chance to talk to one of the experts in this field, and he also worked on Splittermond. That's why I put the talk here. And he also worked on a system that got some kind of a German reboot.
My name is Ashkna Doğan. My pronouns are he, him. I studied Islamic and Turkic studies ages ago. Originally, I'm a translator for Turkish German, but I work as a diversity and empowerment trainer since 14 years. And I worked as editor, author, and a lot of things in the German role-playing industry. How did I come to role-playing? I was 19. I was a late bloomer. I changed school, and I think it was before Easter. And the last day of school, I was smoking with some friends. And they said, what are you going to do during the holidays? I said, no, nothing. I'm going to read a lot. And she said, I'm going to play. I said, what are you going to play? Cards or something? No, I'm going to play a role-playing, The Dark Eye. I said, what's The Dark Eye? I had no idea what it was. And she said, come with us. Then, it began. Then I didn't leave that night and slept over there. And I started playing role-playing games.
And which games have you played since then?
Mostly I played The Dark Eye or The Schwarze Auge, and I stick with it a couple of years. Then I'm a huge fan of Fate. I played a lot of Fate settings. The last huge one I played was Ice and Dampf. It's Ice and Steam. I don't know if there's an English translation. It was from Judith and Christian Vogt. Very cool steampunk setting in 19th century. I played a lot Space 1889. It's also an alternate universe where you play in 19th century and people are on Mars and Venus and something like that. It's really cool. I play Avatar, the novel role-playing game. I really love it because it's very diverse and very well written. I played a lot of things, a lot of indie games. I play things like Kagematsu, etc., etc. I played a long time Coriolis, I think 2 or 3 years. We had a campaign and it was really cool. We started live and then during the Corona times, then we changed to online version. And I played a lot of little stuff. And I played a lot of Splittermond because I was an editor for Splittermond for Clockwork Publishing for the German system. And I was an author there and I wrote and I played it a lot too. That's it, I guess. And I played a lot of things from System Matters. It's called the Small Anthology. They have small indie games for 40 or 50 pages each, and I play them a lot. I play a lot of things where you can have it just on 1 day or 2 days, because it's getting hard to have a campaign where everyone can stick together and meet twice a week. Okay, that's not possible anymore, but once all 2 weeks or once a month. So campaigns are a bit hard to play now.
So you mentioned you worked on Splittermond. What other systems have you worked on?
I worked on Space 1889. I worked on The Dark Eye, on a couple of books. I worked on Mirror 2, and I worked on some small things like Ace in Space. It's an indie role-playing game. It was also a novel, also by Judith and Christian Vogt, and some other little things where I just contributed a couple of pages or something like that. Mostly on Splittermond and mostly on Space 1889 and a bit on The Dark Eye.
Okay, so Space 1889 is, I think, originally in English, and then it was kind of taken over by a German publisher with new supplements. Can you maybe say a little bit about that game?
It was a bit controversial because Clockwork Publishing got the license when I was working there at Clockwork Publishing, but I don't do since they filed for bankruptcy a couple of years ago. We were allowed to write our own books. We were allowed to create our own settings, and we did a lot. And we tried to have some kind of a specific view on German circumstances. And we had on Venus, I remember, some Bavarian and East and South German colonizers, and they had their habits and they had their traditions and so on. It was nice, but it was also hard to get rid of all the colonialism and say, okay, how can we transfer the original version? It was written in the 80s and can find a wording that is not disrespectful, but this is not discriminatory in German. And We made a lot, and we had a lot of supplements to all those things. We had the original English version, and we translated those, but also we had some more chapters and to explain it's history. It's an alternate history. Please watch your language. It doesn't mean that you're allowed to discriminate on your table while you do that. Those are some hints what you can do and what you cannot do. And something like that. Accurate role-playing. Okay, we can discuss about what is accurate role-playing. Accurate role-playing doesn't mean that you can just discriminate against people on the table, so just be as accurate as possible. Those were the things. And we had a lot of discussions in our team. We had 10 to 15, 17 authors who were in the Space 1889 team, and we were always discussing what can we do. Are we going to do a new adventure? Are we going to make a new setting? What are we going to see? Do we have some more women in the archetypes? Because you had mostly no women in the archetypes. And can we have people with other skin color than we didn't have? And if someone comes and says, okay, I would like to play those and those characters, but they're only just male or they're only just white. So we had additional chapters where we said, okay, we are not obliged to have some kind of historical accuracy because he knows what historical accuracy is. This is your game, make it your own. Those were kind of supplements that we had in it. But it was hard because, as you may know, mostly RPG writers are some kind of nerds, and a lot of historians are around them too. And it was like, but that is not accurate. But it's not okay. It was the kind of, we don't have to be accurate. We are not going to write about Victorian ages, how it was really in the 1800s, something like that. It was a kind of tossing against each other and then create something that everyone can some kind of feel good about it.
So you just mentioned the term accurate role-playing, and that reminds me of the book you worked on, which is called Role Inclusive, which has an English title but is actually only available in German. And you were one of the editors of the book, so maybe you can tell us a bit about this work.
It just came out of the blue. I think we were 3 people, Judith Vogt, me, and Frank Reis. And there, as everywhere where people play role-playing games, and there's a huge fandom, there are conventions in Germany too. And Judith Vogt is an author of novels and author of RPG games. I contacted her to contribute to our books for Space 1889 and other role-playing games and said, okay, would you like to write with us? And a couple of months later, she said, oh, there's going to be this convention in Bonn, FeenCon, Fairy Convention. And I'd like to have a panel or just a discussion about diversity and role-playing games, but everyone I know is white. I'll be there and Frank Reis would be there. Frank Reis is also a role-play enthusiast and he's a psychologist for juveniles. And they said, okay, it would be nice if you can contribute as someone who is in the industry too and he's not white. So would it be okay for you? And I was just, okay, why not? Then we had a panel and we discussed about 1 hour. We talked about it. So what is diversity? How wide is it? What can you do? And how cis and how heteronormative is it? Because I'm a gay guy and Frank was also queer. And we were sitting there and said, okay, everything you get, it's very binary. So you have males and you have females and the love interest or people you have to rescue is always a princess if you're a guy and something like that. We talked about a lot of things. And then we talked about feminist views and we talked about critical whiteness too. And it was very cool. There were a lot of people. The interest was very huge. And we stood in touch and then we had the idea it would be nice to write something about it. And first of all, we thought we were going to write an article, but afterwards I said, okay, I'm working here in a publishing house. The idea is cool and I am a diversity trainer. So why not? We can do it. And then we said, let's gather some people together and write a book about diversity and representation in role-playing. And then we asked a lot of people, and then I was working for Clockwork Publishing, and then I went to Clockwork Publishing and said, okay, guys, I have this idea. Okay, and I said, okay, fantastic, if you do it, why not? We had a crowdfunding, and then just realized it. And we called it Role Inclusive, because we were always don't talk about role-playing game, and then roll with rolling, dice rolling. I said, okay, we can call it Role Inclusive, but not Role Inclusive. I think today I wouldn't take a German version. I love Role Inclusive. I still would say we're going to call it Role Inclusive. And we have some chapters about different categories, diversity. You have every person can be discriminated against by some kind of markers. And we look for authors who are in the role-playing industry. and who can write a couple of things to those categories. I've written, my essay was about people of color and how people of color are represented and treated in the role-playing game industry. And we had a gay rights activist who wrote about gender representation, and we had a psychologist who is also a role-play game author and also a novel author who had an essay about psychology in role plays and how you treat some kind of neurodiverse people, and a lot of things also, and how political is it, and how feminist is it. And then we had at the end some kind of nano games, which were diverse and which were some kind of more inclusive in our view, which broke some traditional ways of making a role-playing game. And we had a lot of links and so on and so on. We had an essay about critical whiteness too. That was really cool. Yeah, it's still cool, and it's sold out. As you know, you can get it in print. You just have to buy the ebook.
Yeah, for the audience, I snatched one of the last printed copies from a bookshop. And for the international audience, there's one chapter by every author who's from Canada, but it's in German, but she wrote something there too. So you might know her from games like Monster Hearts or The Quiet Year, etc. Speaking of diversity elements, so you talked about being a non-white person and talking about that in gaming. Can you maybe talk a bit about this experience in the German gaming sector? Because especially with the Turkish background, I did talk to someone from the Das Schwarze Auge archive about the works of Uğurcan Yüce, who is famous for the covers of the Dark Eye books in the 1990s, especially, I think. But how else is this minority representation going on in the German gaming scene?
It didn't change. Speaking of Uğurcan Yüce, he was the reason why I started writing The Dark Eye too, because I was fond of the early adventures and early books, and I said, oh, okay, I know the style of drawing this guy, because Uğurcan Yüce has drawn a lot of movie posters in the 80s and the end of the 70s in Turkey. And I said, cool, and then I read his name. I said, oh, it's a Turkish name. So this is not something that only German people can make, so I can contribute to it too. That was the reason why I started, okay, let's play, let's write, let's get in contact. I get in contact and ask people to do something. Afterwards, there were some names like Tahir Shaikh or Ivi Demirtel, etc. There were a lot of other people with Turkish or non-specifically traditional German names, and I didn't know the people. But the books were very, very sexist, racist, and a lot of Orientalism, etc. And it didn't change. I was the only one when I was working in the Clockwork Publishing in the whole industry who was not white. And I was always the only person who had to explain, this is racist, we cannot do that, that's not okay. White fragility is very, very common, and white fragility is everywhere in Germany and also as a part of the German society, even in the role-playing game industry. It was very, very hard. It is still very, very hard. I think 90% of the publishing houses in Germany who publish role-playing games are not talking to me because I'm the person who says that's not okay, and they're trying to just keep up a kind of fake harmony. So you cannot talk about this. You cannot say that this is not racist. How can you offend me? It's the same. It's just by the book how people react when you just say, okay, something's not okay what you're doing. It didn't change. The most people were not white or had a Turkish background, Arabic background, or some kind of other kinds of backgrounds in the role-play industry is when you are at a convention and the security guys and the cleaning stuff. That's all. All other people who are just there and presenting their games, they're all nearly totally white. And it didn't change. I was always the man, oh, okay, explain. How is it in Turkish society? Also, I have no idea. I was brought up in Germany. Why are you asking me about Turkish politics, Turkish games, and Turkish and so on? It's still the thing. And if you say something, it's really harsh. It's really hard to some kind of maintain in the industry. But it's the same in other industries too. This is not something specific to the German role-playing game.
You talked about the industry. What about players?
It's changing. It's changing. When I started playing, I was the only one who was not German, who was not white, till the 2010s and 11s. Then it changed. On conventions, there were people who had some kind of background, who were immigrated, etc. But it's still very, very low. Not even 5% or 4%, I would say. the books got more accessible, the books got more diverse, and the authors just realized, because there were a lot of people who just contributed and discussed and showed some mistakes. So said, okay, we are not writing just only for a white German male heteronormative audience, so we have to take care of what we are doing. And diversity became some kind of a mainstream idea to go along with. Since 2015-16, people tried to make more accessible and more inclusive games. And I think that was the reason why they all challenged themselves. Because in Germany, the role-playing game industry, the role-playing game scene or community, what you even say, is mostly left. And the idea that the people are going to do something more inclusive, something modern, something for everyone, something that is not discriminating anyone is the main idea. But as we know, racism, sexism area is in every political views there. People don't see the structures. And that's even more hard. Just to convince the people, say, okay, what is not okay, what is not hard to say, what is hard to explain, or what you have to change. There are some conventions and there are some gatherings when people come together for a couple of days and just play role-playing games on board games, etc., etc. And in the role-playing game industry, there are some gatherings where only for the producers and the contributors, and you get just invited there because people are doing this since 20 years and 30 years. And when I was invited in month, we were 60. I was the only non-white guy. It's just they're doing this since 30 years. Okay, what's wrong? And when you talk to the people, the N-word is dropping, and etc. etc. You say, okay, we are here on left people, and we can talk about it, but this is not okay. And that's the reason I'm not working for a huge company anymore, because that's the reason I have not stamina to talk about it or to discuss with people. It's just only in the scene, even not in the indie scene. So when you work with some independent publishing houses who say, okay, I'm against everything, I don't want to discriminate, but it's also so queer feminists or white queer feminists, they don't want to have anything with racism, but they're not able to just think about their own attitudes and so on. It's sadly very common. I don't think that it's going to change so soon.
You said you did diversity consulting or sensitivity reading for role-playing games. How does that work in practice? Because I can't really imagine how that works.
Afterwards, yes, I'm working as a sensitivity reader too. A sensitivity reader is someone who looks about on text, on products, written products, or just visual products, and says if it's something wrong or if it's something right. Sensitivity reading is focused on representation of people who are mainly not represented that much. It is about people who experience discrimination, but also about people who have some kind of neurodiversities or some people who have illnesses like, I don't know, lupus and so on, so that you just represent it precisely and adequate. So that you just don't make something up because you don't know, but you say it might be like this, but people say, okay, you have to do it correctly. And my point is, as a Muslim gay guy with a Turkish background and as a diversity trainer, I am more the expert in racism, Islam, and if it comes to queerness and the intersections of those three things. So how does it come? A publishing house, if it's a publishing house, says, okay, we have a book, we are writing about it, but we have a chapter about, let's say, culture, and it's slightly based on Arabic countries, so it's slightly based on Islam or something like that. Then I have looked about it and said, okay, what do you mean with slightly? Or are you just reproducing the same stereotypes, like what is mainly seen? So women have no rights, men can have more wives than just one, and so on and so on. I said, okay, why do we have those people live in a desert? Why do you have to be not white? Can't we just change it if you want to work with the traditions and so on? On the other hand, sometimes those are the authors who came and said, okay, I have to translate something. We had it in Monster Hearts. I played Monster Hearts a long time, 2 years or 3 years. And 2 years ago, there was a translation of Monster Hearts in German by System Matters. And I was asked for the chapter, where is it about racism, and where they talk about discrimination. I said, okay, we translated it from the English into German. Can you please look up for the wording, or did we forget something? Because, you cannot translate race as Rasse in German, or you cannot translate brown people like braune Menschen in German, because there are a lot of historical cultural differences how you use words. It's like that. Then I comment and they look up at it and say, okay, we can understand it. Oh, that's understandable. We're going to change that, or we are not going to change it. That's how sensitivity reading works.
And Ashkin mentioned System Matters. If you're wondering about that publisher, we'll cover them in the next part. Another game that is very popular in Germany is Call of Cthulhu. In the early 2000s, I frequently attended the convention Hannover Spielt in my hometown Hanover, which at the time had somewhat of a focus on that game. The next interviewee was often a guest there, and for technical reasons we had to conduct this talk via Skype, so I apologize for any sound issues.
My name is Frank Heller. I started role-playing in 1985 when I got the role-playing game Das Schwarze Auge as a Christmas present. After that I was so flashed I bought nearly every other role-playing game that was available in German at that time. I believe it was in 1986 that I also bought the German edition of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, which I played a lot as well, until I sent in a scenario that I wrote to Pegasus Spiele, the German publisher of Call of Cthulhu in German, and it was accepted and published 2 years later in 2001, and so since 1999 I was involved in the German edition of Call of Cthulhu, first as an author, very soon afterwards as an editor, and from 2001 on as editor-in-chief for a Call of Cthulhu magazine called Cthulhu Welten, which was also published in English as Worlds of Cthulhu for, I believe, 5 or 6 editions, and I was editor-in-chief for the complete Call of Cthulhu German role-playing game until the end of 2011 when I dropped out because my focus in life changed.
So Call of Cthulhu is pretty popular in Germany. Do you know why?
Well, I've never really asked why, but Call of Cthulhu in Germany has never been quite the same as Call of Cthulhu in America or in England, because from about 1989 onward the design was changed to be more historical. It incorporated photographs from the 1920s instead of drawings, and the overall flair was more shifted towards a historical thing, a thing that was rooted in the real world, and it wasn't just a fantasy. You didn't have nondescript places who could be anywhere, but suddenly you had adventures that really played in settlements that existed in these real surroundings of that time with people who actually lived at that time. I know it happened also in American books and adventures, but it was really a very distinct feature of those early German publications, and this kept on going and got more and more. So the German Call of Cthulhu line always, at least until 2011, until I dropped out, it had a very distinct profile with a lot of our own publications who were accepted and licensed by Chaosium, which was really great that they allowed us to do so many of our own things, and maybe this could also have to do with the game being popular in Germany, because it was more designed to be interesting for people in Germany than just the things by Chaosium.
Could you give examples of these German publications?
Well, it started off with adventure scenarios that took place in real places and with people from the time, and we later also did a lot of source books, for example, about Berlin in the 20s, even before Chaosium's Berlin in the 20s appeared a couple of years ago. Ours was from 2002, I guess. And we had and still have a source book about Germany in the 1920s. You have other places like Vienna in the 1920s, Prague in the 1920s. You have other source books as well that are not specifically for Germany. We did a weapons compendium, which was our own design, not something copied or taken over by Chaosium, and books about mythos tomes, about mythos artifacts. Our creatures handbook, called Malleus Monstrorum, was adopted at least by title and with the artwork by Chaosium later on. And we had additional ideas for these. It wasn't just a creatures handbook, for example, but you had a kind of short story around each creature. One part introducing the creature, then the description, like you know it from Chaosium's publication, and then the end of the encounter with the creature, the end of the text about this encounter. So you not only had this just technical information about the creature, but also an idea how to set it up in a specific situation.
So apart from the monster book, was anything else translated into English that you are aware of?
Well, I should probably mention our German edition of Beyond the Campaign Beyond the Mountains of Madness. The original author, Chess, did a completely new version for us. I had a lot of feedback for him, what I really would love to have changed, and he totally agreed on doing it himself. He loved the changes we did, and since he didn't find his original files anymore, he rewrote the campaign for us, but it hasn't been translated into English as far as I know. We even added some additional side quests, you could say, playing out in the city in the mountains, which unfortunately for copyright reasons were later removed, but in the first German edition you still find them. And the whole concept of this campaign was changed so that you didn't need any breathing apparatus while exploring the city, so you had a lot more time, since Lovecraft himself doesn't describe anyone using breathing apparatus, so we decided this was a valid thing, so you've got more time to really explore the location. What was translated into English? We had this Worlds of Cthulhu magazine, as I said, which came out in English as well, and Malleus Monstrum wasn't translated, they used the artwork and the title.
When doing the Germany books, how did you include German history or mythology in the material?
That's a good point, yeah. From early on, this special German thing was including mythology and folklore. That's how it started off, with a scenario called the Froschkönig Fragmente, which was, I don't know what this fairy tale is called in English, by the way, but it's about this frog king. This is still going on, that you pick from the rich cultural heritage, from the folklore. There are lots of folk tales in any region of Germany, be it at the North Sea coast or somewhere in the wooded areas and the mountains. Everywhere you find stories about ghosts and fairies and monsters and tragic events that can be very strange events that can be used as a basis for an adventure that explores the real background of these myths. So, of course, it always has got something to do with the Cthulhu mythos, which again makes it a bit boring if you do it too often. So if everything about folklore has a background in the Cthulhu mythos, I wouldn't like that as well. But if you do it sparingly and with the right approach, it's quite fascinating for everyone involved.
And how did you deal with the rise of fascism in Germany in the 1920s?
Well, apart from the other Cthulhu role-playing game Achtung Cthulhu, which also came out in German, but I wasn't part of that, in the classical Call of Cthulhu line in Germany didn't cover the Third Reich. Only very small parts of it, and certainly never published, at least not in my time, a scenario that was taking place there, because I feel that you can only lose if you do something like that. Either you try a historical piece and it's not historical enough, or you do something differently and get criticized for not being earnest enough with it. That's why I turned down the offer to be editor-in-chief for Achtung Cthulhu role-playing game. It's great if people like it and play it, but I wouldn't want to be the one responsible for publishing something like that. In the 20s, of course, you also have the upcoming Nazism. This is certainly covered now and then when it's relevant. For example, in Chaosium's Berlin sourcebook, there's an adventure included. By the way, the sourcebook is absolutely fantastic. I've translated it in German and had contact with the author, and he had never been to Berlin, which was really baffling because he got everything right. It was so point on. Anyway, in this book you find, for example, parts of the historical clashes between Nazis and others in Berlin at the time in the 20s. But it's never been a main focus for the scenarios we published. It's been a hugely fantastic time to be able to design this game in Germany, to bring my ideas, our ideas in. We built a team that's still on it, and it was just a great time, and I'm always happy to meet the people from back then at conventions or other locations.
Not long ago, I saw some absolutely amazing Call of Cthulhu props on a German web store. I just had to find out more about them.
Hello, Moritz. Hello, dear listeners. I'm Matthias from the Obscure Yard, a small web shop which offers handmade props and handouts for all kinds of role-playing games. And I and my friends who are running the shop with me, we are playing role-playing games for about longer than 20 years. We started out with classics in German like Dark Eye, D&D, Call of Cthulhu. And we found our way into live action role playing, and we still are quite active in both kinds of role playing games, which changed a little bit by becoming parents.
And which games do you currently play?
I personally play still The Dark Eye and Earthdawn, and I have a lot of friends who play it. And yes, of course, D&D and Call of Cthulhu are also games I'm playing when I have enough time and the right persons beside me.
So this Obscuriat, how did that come to be?
In our passion for role-playing games, we always find it fascinating when things are tangible, when they are really present. In live role-playing games, of course, it's a central element, but we also love it in pen and paper sessions when the game masters put out sealed letters of the king on the table, or when you can pick up the Egyptian artifact with your hands. As game masters or organizer of live role-playing games, we often build handouts and props ourselves. Every now and then we had the idea of sharing our passion and our knowledge of making props with others, but that usually came to nothing. And about 4 years ago, we sat together at a games evening, and once again we came up with the idea of creating handouts and props and making them available to the role-playing community. And this time we actually put the idea into practice, and this was the birth of Obscuriat.
So when I look at your website, you currently have 3 sets, and these are all for Call of Cthulhu or similar scenarios. I'll also link to the page so people can look it up. It's, of course, very visual. There are artifacts, the box with things you can grab. Can you maybe describe a bit what would be in one of these boxes?
We have 3 different sets, we call them. 2 are inspired by ancient Egypt, and one is, the theme is ancient South American cultures. And in our first concept that we had, we want to offer props for integration them into the game master's own adventures, so that you can get the props and create your own ideas, what you want to do with them in your adventures. We quickly got the feedback that it would be cool to have ready made up adventures that go with the props. So we expand the idea to include a fictional world centered around this Obscuriat Valser. We now have 3 sets, but only one is with an adventure so far. Yeah, and the props are oriented on themes like the Cthulhu universe or Indiana Jones-like motifs, so that you have old maps, you have statues, you have coins, you have shipping boxes with old stamps, so that you can explore the world in this motif like ancient Egypt or South America. We work with different materials, so that's not only paper handouts. We also have things made up of wood, of metal, of clay. We also try out new things, new materials. So it's important for us to design the things, the pieces ourselves, and creating the object by hand, to touch the materials, for example, in the creation of sculptures, or we do the coins, for example, or we have a mirror made up of metal. We are doing the casting of the metal by ourselves, and this is the thing we like, to do it out with our hands, to have the designing process. That's our motivation to do it.
I wouldn't be able to make such a sculpture. Do you have like a background in making lab props and it comes from there?
Yes, the most knowledge, but we also have in our team, as I said, we are 4 persons. One of our friends is a sculptor, so she learned it professionally. And we have one of our friends is a media artist, so there are professionals in that. And a lot of our know-how is learning by doing, and the experience we made up in designing things for lab events or for our role-playing sessions.
So for the first set, you already published an adventure, and I just saw on DriveThruRPG, it's also available in English.
Yes, it's available in English and in German. We have the digital form and DriveThruRPG, and we also offer a printed version in German.
And then the handouts in the set would be in German, I could guess.
In German and in English too. You can decide.
Oh, both. Okay. Okay, and have you thought about doing other genres than Call of Cthulhu?
We have ideas for it. too many ideas, I think. But considering the time and the project still open and what happened for now. We have idea sets with a medieval theme and also for modern day settings. But I said we have 3 sets and there's only one adventure. Currently we are writing adventures for the other 2 sets. And then there will be a new 4th upcoming set and there will be also an adventure for this. As I said, we first developed the sets and the props. So we want to offer them for the own adventure of Game Masters. And as we get the feedback that it was nice to have pre-made adventures, we get into it. And it wasn't our original idea to publish adventures. We really realized while writing the adventures that it was more difficult to write an adventure for existing props than to write adventure first and think about or develop the props at the same time. It is a little bit complicated, but we are still making progress and we hope to publish both open adventures, one in ancient Egypt, one settled in South America this year, we hope.
Okay, and why did you choose ancient Egypt and South America as settings?
For us, it's a classic theme in the Call of Cthulhu world. So it was the first idea, but we have also ideas for Europe adventures, for German things. Maybe I say a little bit of the fictional world we built up for the Obscuriat, how we think about this. The Obscuriat, or by the way, Obscuriat is an artificial word made up of obscure, which means strange or mysterious, and the German word Antiquariat, which means antiquarian. So it's a place where you can get mysterious things. And the Obscuriat is run by Severin Walser, a fictional person, an older, little bit eccentric man who was interested in occult and strange things. He had a feedback of one customer who compared him to Konrad Coriander. It's a antiquarian from the Never-Ending Story from Michael Ende. And I personally find it's quite fitting for our image of this person. So the Obscuriat is set in the 1920s in the German town of Aachen. It's a fictional world of the real town of Aachen. It's located on the border from Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands.
Just to interrupt you for a second. Also, you and the team are roughly from the same region, aren't you?
Yes, so we know the city very well, very great historical background. So that's very inspiring. If we walk through the city, we had a lot of ideas. We take a little bit of the real history and mix it together with fictional ideas. We get tales from the history and put it in our adventures or parts of it. Yeah, in this world, around the Obscuriat, about the person Severin Walser, all our adventures are settled. So in the first adventure, you are hired by him to get information and the artifact. And in the following adventures, you play the prequel, how he gets the artifacts, or the sequels, what would happen if he had sold the artifacts or some strange obscure things to the person, or maybe the person gets cursed or such things like that. So that's the idea, to have the Obscuriat as the anchor where all it happens and ends or started. I hope our customers, our friends, and all people who get in contact with our product like it. And if not so, we like to get feedback. If you see our products, if you have ideas for a new product, send an email, write a comment on Facebook or Instagram or wherever you find us.
So this was part 2 of 3. Thank you for listening to the World of RPGs. For now, you can go right ahead to the finale about the German indie scene. And it's about some amazing games that even I didn't know about before.